mid-early 90s. And when I was part of Cooley's Bun, we went through our own evolution. I remember the first days of KZ. Up until then, I didn't know any Asian, let alone South Asian queer folks. I wasn't out to my family, and I felt very, very alone. And it meant so much to me to be with women who looked like me, who I felt like I could be my whole self with whom I could be safe, women with whom I did not have to translate my experience. And each of us thought at one point or another that we were the only one. KZ was the place that grounded me. So first, KZ was a South Asian lesbian and bisexual women's group. Then we were approached by a number of queer West Asian women, West Asia also known as Middle East. And after some discussion, we became a South Asian and West Asian group. And then we considered the experience specifically of trans women and evolved into a lesbian, bisexual, and transgender women's group. We intentionally participated in multiracial coalitions like the Color Triangle. But it was hard to evolve. We had long discussions about making these changes, and for some of the people who were part of KZ, the point was social sisterhood, not necessarily political liberation. And frankly, these changes, even for me, it was like being asked to shed a skin that I had finally gotten used to and comfortable in. As a queer South Asian woman, I had felt out of place in so many places for so long. I just wanted to curl up with my KZ sister friends and be done. I didn't want to have to look at who and what I was shutting out, or how I was benefiting from that exclusion. I wanted it to be just us. But who was that us? Even before we expanded to including West Asian and trans women, it had become clear pretty quickly that within our little group, there were still significant differences. We didn't all speak the same languages, we hadn't grown up with the same religions, our heritage was from different countries, some of us were citizens and others were not, some of us grew up poor and others middle or upper class. It was the first time that I truly understood in a very personal way that my navy blue passport embossed in gold with United States of America was privilege. My point is that even within this self-identified safe haven, from a world that didn't create space for us and didn't reflect us, there weren't just demographic differences, but there were differences in privilege. And it was that understanding that made it important and necessary for me and us to evolve. And that took a willingness to take risks. You can't grow if you're not willing to shed your skin and to have that skin split and move forward, a little raw, a little vulnerable, and leave that old version of your skin behind.
Sharmili.
Easy, right? We don't live in a world or in a country that necessarily encourages that. In fact, the systems of social injustice are built upon keeping us in the skins we're most comfortable in, or the skins we're convinced we're most comfortable in. For example, in anti-violence work, we treat domestic violence and rape and hate crimes and trafficking as if they're unrelated. Now, they're not the same, but to suggest that they're not deeply entrenched in patriarchy just doesn't make sense. In the new era of social media and tailored content, there are subtle but powerful mechanisms making sure that we live in echo chambers rather than in collaborative, raucous environments. On Facebook, for example, they've set up your news feed so that their algorithms tell them what opinions you are most likely to have and news that you are most likely to quote-unquote interact with. And that's what appears first. On top of that, particularly with our presidential campaigns getting underway, there's the old and unfortunately successful tactic of pitting us against one another. It's the immigrants versus the poor people. It's gay folks versus people of color. As though we are not all part of all of those identities and more at once. More and more, we have to be intentional about reaching out and working together and taking risks. Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky is the author of Trauma Stewardship, and some of you have gone to some of her events here in Chicago. And she talks about this idea of getting on the train. So, you know, the train that you get on, it's the train you get on where you're complaining about the boss, or you're gossiping about a friend, or you're talking about how those people just don't get it. You know this train well. You've been on it so many times that there is a first-class compartment with your name etched above the door. There is a drink named after you on this train. Mine's called the Sharmili Special. It's fizzy and has a little lime. But getting on the train does not involve risk. It has the same destination and it's familiar. The satisfaction of this train, though, it's shallow and it's fleeting, and we don't really get anywhere, or at least nowhere new. Lipsky says that the answer is to first acknowledge that you're getting on the train, to be intentional about the decision about getting on that train, and then make the decision and communicate the decision to your fellow travelers. So, I'm only going to stay on this train for 2 stops and then I'm off. Or, I'm not getting on this train at all today. I think one of the challenges with doing social justice work and being part of communities that are historically disenfranchised is figuring out which train do you really need to get on. It's figuring out how not to get on the world sucks train, but to get on the train that says things are hard and things are beautiful. Figuring out how to let the no one else can understand us train, let it roll on by, and how to get on the how do we make change together train. Making change together in ways that are both healing and challenge us, and sometimes heal us through challenging us, we can't do it without taking risks. Now let me be clear, there is a role for the train that you already know. There is a real and human need for venting and comfort and familiarity. But I know that if I am truly committed to liberation, both mine and ours, I have to be willing to be uncomfortable. And I have to be willing to both be held accountable and to hold others accountable. Okay, side note, I have a confession. I am so sick of the word accountability. If anyone has any good alternatives, please let me know. The reason that I am sick of the word accountability is that we treat accountability as though it's a destination or a light switch. And in this context, our context of making social change and creating fellowship, accountability has to be a process. And I'm not always good at this myself. I am so ready at times for people to screw up. I will say to myself, aha, see, I just knew she didn't get me. And back I crawl into my old skin, onto my train, the Sharmili Special in my hand. But listen, if we had made this pact to work to liberation together, and you say something or behave in a way that suggests that you don't understand me, I have to make a choice. Sometimes reclining in my first-class compartment with the Sharmili Special might be the answer, but most of the time, I have to talk to you. And you've got to listen, and then you have to make your own choices, and we'll continue, because our rights, our human rights, are ones that we have to fight for together, fiercely and with joy, as the choir and our drummers so beautifully have embodied. So, as I think about kind of the theme for today, healing internally, communities without boundaries, and the proposed initiatives for 2012 for Affinity and for Amigas Latinas, I see the cracks in the old skin of 2011, and I see what is new glowing underneath. The fact that all of you are here participating in an event that is both old and new, both familiar and different, means that you also see what is glowing underneath. And we are a beautiful, beautiful thing to see. Thank you. Gracias.